It has been a while, but let's do this. As we head into 2024, I wanted to do a restart, a few steps back, if you will. And what better way to do that than to go back to the beginning? We'll get into a little bit more about what I need to do, but let's stick to Japan right now. Now, this is part story, part experience, and a whole lot of examples as we answer the question, did Japan steal American style? So I wanted to reintroduce this question to a new batch of fashion enthusiasts, as well as some OGs out there that want a little bit of context. So for those who don't know, I'm your boy Reggie Casual. Let's get it. So when we use the word steal, we have to be very careful. It does in fact hold a lot of weight, and it has a bit of a negative reputation. I suppose a better way to say it is, did Japan adopt American style and proceed to make it their own? And right about now is where we have to debunk this huge myth. While the 1940s to 1960s in Japan were indeed marked by foreign influences, attributing this solely to America is misleading. British, Russian, German, Belgian, French, and American cultures as well have all woven their threads into the fabric of Japanese contemporary culture, extending of course to fashion. Popular narrative often credits America's big guns as the sole architects of Japan's modern style identity, but this is just part of the story. Japan's long period of self-imposed isolation, what they call Sakoku, until the mid-19th century, set the stage for a profound transformation post-World War II. The American occupation from 1945 to 1952 played a crucial role in introducing Western fashion elements into Japan, and broader cultural economic changes also contributed to that as well. Now, this has led to quite a believable story that America, specifically the United States, was the biggest influence culturally to a new Japan. To key in a bit more, we have to take a look back at those 1950s again, though. So before we get into that, a word from our sponsor, Squarespace. A big part of fashion is community, and building a fashion brand or any business requires a strong one. That's why using Squarespace for your new website might be the way to go. Besides being packed with great website templates, built-in SEO and analytics, Squarespace's new members areas make it easy to create, foster, and grow a community of true fans. Give back by giving members exclusive content, discounts, and much more, all while monetizing your business. So use our code squarespace.com/thecasual to save 10% off of your first website, and let Squarespace help you build your brand, business, and community. Now, many of us know that in the 1950s, Americana ran the mood in Japan. The overall tenor shifted as post-war Japan opened up to globalization. And with America running the censorship program in the new Japan, many young Japanese found a way to express in ways never before imagined. Seriously, before then, Japanese people weren't even allowed to watch movies where people were kissing. That is true, the true story. That immediately changed following World War II, not just via American cinema, but Japanese as well, suggesting Japan was ripe for change, even amongst their creatives. Now, I won't go over all the details, but let's just say that this adoption of Western norms led Japan to becoming a global powerhouse, one that would rival even the US in terms of influence in the world. Business world, at least. You guys know pretty much every major Japanese company there is. Seriously, you do. And because primarily the US was the overseer in this post-world Japan, American influence was ingrained in the mainstream of Japanese pop culture. This is true, and the influence ran so deep that its remnants can still be vividly seen today. So yes, American influence was pretty major in the 1950s and 60s. But enter the 1970s, another culture resonated with Japan a bit more, especially the youth culture in Japan. Punk from the UK began to infiltrate Japanese society, and a new generation of young people wanted very much to deviate from the traditional norms and values of the previous generation, much like in any place. Funny that. This is kind of interesting because the attitude of the generation before was anything but traditional. During the US occupation of Japan, they were all into deviating from traditional norms. But now this new generation was like, we want to deviate from those traditional norms. It's weird. Be that as it may, UK punk and its offshoots is perhaps the biggest reason Japanese fashion took a slight turn left, or a full turn. The infusion of punk allowed for more experimentation and an appreciation for Western, primarily European, design. So names like Vivienne Westwood early on began to make huge strides in Japan, and Japanese punk bands paved the way for a new era of expression. It was around this time that we also began to see the work of Rei Kawakubo, Kenzo, Kanzai Yamamoto, and Issei Miyake. Yoji Yamamoto, as you all know, would come a bit later, but he would also contribute to that. But these stalwarts eventually inspired a new generation of designers whose penchant for lifestyle fashion and subsequent dedication to it would popularize and create a sort of mysticism of Japanese fashion that prevails to this day. This Japanese punk era of fashion was inspired by UK lifestyles, Parisian experimentation and chic, Italian daring and quality, and to a degree, yes, American casual and practicality. Now, some of you may even come to know about this due to the work of David Marks and his book Ametora. And while David's premise was how Japan saved American fashion and style, less attention was paid to how Japan commodified various cultures and influences, fused them with their own sensibilities and traditional elements to create something entirely Japanese. So in a sense, Japan saved American fashion by preserving it and then flipping it. This cultural fusion set forth a wave of generational contemporaries whose used the unspoken message of punk to pursue a life stripped from the traditional ideals that Japan had placed on its citizens' shoulders. From Fujiwara to Nakamura, Takizawa, Nishiyama, Miyashita, Takahashi, even all the way to Nigo. These individuals, among hundreds of others, blended these cultural and lifestyle nods from a world away and made them into something that resonated with the Japanese audience. This was not simply a byproduct of American go-getism. Japan and its citizens hungered for what was going on outside of Japan. Looking at it that way, it's kind of easy to understand why they adopted fashion in such a direct way. So when we go back to the premise of did Japan steal American style, one must also concede that Japan, by the very nature of adopting so much, they very much so created their own aesthetic by adopting those elements of culture, pop culture, fashion, whatever. Admittedly, there are instances where the style of Japanese fashionistas is a one-to-one style, the most egregious being the near cosplayification of certain lifestyles. 90s hip-hop styling has to be like the glaring example here, which of that, when you see a Japanese person wearing it, the only super Japanese thing about it is the fact that it has a penchant to glorify the past, which Japanese people tend to do. And it's so correct, it's indistinguishable outside of the fact that the person who's wearing it is Japanese. However, the problem is that image of Japanese fashion is replayed, rehashed, and regurgitated by Western media, personalities, and fashion magazines and outlets as the definitive style of Japan. The image that Japanese fashion is a rehash of styles of yesteryear and reworked trends. However, upon closer inspection, or if you come to Japan, hopefully you have a chance to one day. If you haven't, it's great. You should absolutely come, absolutely. It becomes abundantly clear that Japanese fashion is anything but strictly a rehash of old styles. And it could be argued it's a cultural evolution of those styles, and wholly a Japanese one that is decidedly different. Well, if you find that hard to believe, look at what's popular now out west. Wide, airy, gritty styles. Those are evolutions of styles of the past. What if I told you that entire aesthetic, that whole reinvention of these styles that are popularized today was spearheaded by many Japanese fashionistas and designers, and then sold to you as a new bag of goods because no outlet actually covers the Japanese fashion industry and designers properly, in my honest opinion, but that opinion it holds a lot of weight. It's the reason so many artists, designers, and photographers visit Japan, because it's oddly familiar, but then there's that little different thing, and they bring that with them. And let me just note here, that doesn't mean better. It doesn't mean that Japanese is better fashion. There are plenty of gripes about Japanese fashion, of course. It means that it's different. I personally happen to like that difference. Most people know that. Whether another person does like that difference or not is totally up to them, and that's really the whole point of fashion. You can like and not like things, hopefully. This ultimately gets us to the point that stylistically, the Japanese people have figured out a way to make any genre meticulously chic. That's their MO, that's their bag. Everything looks almost too well put together, and this often leads to a certain viewpoint that seems inauthentic. And while many Japanese people partake heavily into the entire lifestyle that they choose to dress as, the sheer near perfection of some of these looks can look quite jarring to the untrained eye or the unknown eye. But this is coming from a Westerner. Granted, a Western observer who spent his entire collegiate career and after collegiate career studying the culture and history of Japan, along with years of piecing together the fashion secrets like a crazy person. But yeah, I'm still a foreign observer. Perhaps those looks that the Japanese partake in are genuine and just a way to express themselves. So to them, it could be as natural as their interests. It's just the Japanese way of doing things. But that's another discussion entirely. Stealing American style, however, as stated earlier, is a bit of a stretch because one could say a good majority of American fashion was influenced by Europe. Point: culture is meant to be, and perhaps impossible not to be, shared. How we adopt and evolve those ideas is the fantastic thing about humanity, as corny as that sounds. For instance, when Japanese people and designers flip a style their own way, it almost looks impossible for a Westerner to wear it wholesale. But once that adoption occurs, it becomes clear that the way Japanese people are styling isn't necessarily different in its aim, it's just different in its approach, still arriving at the same place. So that approach isn't stolen or even borrowed, it's entirely Japanese. Further, I believe this penchant to raise alarms about who started what is a very American thing, and in many cases, rightly so. Far too often, movements are attributed to one group without acknowledging the groups that had a significant impact on the movement in the first place. In Japan, however, this adoption has led to a fashion industry that more so preserves the styles of yesteryear, builds on top of them, and while still maintaining that style, develop a new vision for it, or a new road, or a new approach, whatever you want to say, which ultimately leads to a new viewpoint. Such was the case with brands like Bape, Neighborhood, Mastermind, Double Taps, all those brands we had mentioned earlier, Capital, whatever. Brands that changed the discussion. And that's only within the confines of street, in that case, all the brands that I just mentioned. We don't even want to go into designer fashion. That's a whole nother can of worms. Because of that, there are often two viewpoints. The, oh my God, Japanese fashion is the best ever because they are different or because they're so brave. Yeah, it's a different culture. Or the other point of view, which is like, man, what they wearing is straight trash. And quite often that second response is because of the annoyance that some of those people have with the hyping of Japanese fashion and style by some outlets, something I often get accused of. But remember, this channel is literally about Japanese fashion primarily, which is something we hope to get back to. Our position is not to hype it, but to break it down for people to understand the cultural differences and how we can learn from each other by virtue of those differences. And I suppose that's why Japanese styling and fashion is surprisingly freeing once you get into it, once you really understand it. Not only are you surrounded by a different set of norms and evolutionary looks based on culture, but also adds depth to the conversation of what clothes are besides things we wear. And style is simply how one chooses to present themselves. And that is special. I fear we're living in a time where those kind of values are becoming stale. Wearing what others deem aesthetically pleasing or appropriate is becoming such a detriment to fashion and style and creativity that it hurts. Setting arbitrary rules that have no place in the realm of personal style, it's almost as if individuals set style parameters for others so as to feel better about themselves in some weird way. And in the case of Japan, for a country that values harmony, conformity, and consistency, to have such a colorful fashion culture and viewpoint in it that combines the aspects of various cultures as well as their own, and often without competition or judgment, is nothing short of amazing. So while the West, or in this case the US, has authentic swagger, no doubt about that, you've always had it if you're from America, Japan has its own brand of cultural swagger that appreciates and culturally elevates the world of fashion in its own way. It's just a shame we don't get to see it more often. And here's hoping we at The Casual rectify that going forward. I want to go ahead and thank you all for joining us today. Be on the lookout for new content and more conversations like these in the future. We got some great new stuff coming your way, and we don't want you to miss it. So like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, you know what it is. Keep it locked right here for all of your info on international fashion, culture, and business from Tokyo. It's your boy, and keep it casual. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. And I will see you guys in a minute. Seriously, new year, new things.